So we have two speakers in one session now, Hope Sample and Wang. Hope is currently visiting assistant professor at Grand Valley State University, and she's due to take up a post at Carleton College later this year. She works on the history of philosophy of time and ethics, especially Kant and Conway. Yong is a PhD student at Binghamton. She's postdoctoral. You've got a PhD from Binghamton, beg your pardon. And she's postdoctoral fellow at Georgetown University, specializing in Confucianism and its dialogue with feminism. So her research aims to show why versions of Confucian ideas and practices still challenge and inspire contemporary society, not only in the East and East Asian diaspora, but also people living in the modern cosmopolitan world. So this will be the second paper which crosses the globe in this respect with Anne Conway. So I look forward to your paper entitled Grounds of Moral Equality in Yunjidang and Conway.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes,
okay.
Great.
We're very excited to be able to present this work. This is a new collaboration between us, so we're very excited to hear any and all comments, feedback you have, because we're developing ideas still. So our topic is Grounds of Moral Equality in Yunjidang and Anne Conway. I'm Hope.
I'm Hwa-young. Nice to meet you, everyone.
So this is a project in comparative philosophy. We are interested not only in the kind of commonalities and differences and their strategies, goals, and argumentation, but also following May Sims, thinking about how these thinkers could have potentially learned from one another or been inspired by one another had they been in conversation. So we would like to have that kind of critical element. So these is the parts. First, I want to talk about my interpretation of how I see the grounds of moral equality in Anne Conway. In part two, Hwa-young is going to take over and tell us that story on the side of Im. Yunjidang is the pen name, so Im is the last name. And then finally, just with the time that we have left, try to give a brief idea about how these thinkers might have learned from one another. Okay, hold on, sorry, I'm gonna set my timer because otherwise I don't know. Okay, so here's something that I think is a kind of paradigm statement of the kind of moral equality that Conway is committed to. She doesn't use the term moral equality, but I think there's a concept of moral equality that's really fundamental in her system. She writes, "For the highest excellence of a creature is to be infinite only in potentiality, not in actuality. That is, it is always able to become more perfect and excellent to infinity, although it never reaches this infinity." So it's this kind of picture of like this infinite progress. Now, the question is, for us, what grounds this egalitarian picture in Conway? I think she's got a specific metaphysics that supports this, and I'm going to try to lay out how I see things. So to do that, let me kind of go over some basics of her metaphysics. So there's three entities in her system. There's God. He's the highest good, which means he's unchanging, according to Conway. There's a kind of a connection there, because the idea is like, if he were to change, it would have to mean that he was changing for the better, but the highest good can't get better. So change wouldn't make sense in a being like that. God's omnipotent, omniscient, all good, and all present. Okay, Christ is good by nature and only changes for the better. It's a mode of or an aspect of God, and it's that Christ is that through which God works together with creatures to support their ultimate moral development. Maybe sometimes Christ is remaining the same. It doesn't all have to be like, every moment getting better, but he definitely can't get worse, right? Being an aspect of God that would contradict divine nature. Creatures, on the other hand, are good by nature, and they receive that nature, from God through Christ, but they can change for better or worse. So they're imperfect in a way that Christ and God could never be, but they are still destined to progress in the limit. So inexorably, no matter what the kind of paths they take in life happen to be, eventually they're going to achieve a level sufficient for salvation. For Conway in her system, that's the kind of highest ideal of human development. Okay, so sorry, it's going to be the same diagram if some of you saw my earlier talk, but here's a kind of diagram of the way we might picture this kind of metaphysical picture. So we've got Conway equates spirit with perfection. She uses metaphor of light to explain spirit. Imperfection is body is dark. And then what we've got is a scale here of increasing levels of spirituality and perfection. God is at the very top. He's infinite perfection. She uses metaphors of a fountain overflowing. God's goodness must necessarily overflow infinitely for all time to ground progress. And even though he's on this diagram, of course, he's an entity of another type because he's the fundamental ground for any perfection that exists on this continuum. There's a bottom because she thinks that there's no infinite evil, so there's a limit to evil. And then on this system, really everything except for God, who's infinite spirit, is both spiritual and bodily. So she's a kind of monist about the created world in the sense that everything has this kind of nature of being good by nature, capable of changing for better or worse, and has spiritual and bodily aspects. What changes as you go up the hierarchy and kind of improve and become more perfect is those kind of bodily and dark aspects kind of transform into more spiritual aspects, but they can never leave behind the body because then they would become God. And there's only one thing that's pure spirit in her system. So this is kind of the picture. And what's interesting in Conway's system is you could start off as a rock, here, you could start off as a grain of sand and work your way up to what it would be the kind of highest, level that there could be that you can achieve, which is this infinite, progress. So there is a kind of radical egalitarianism, interspecies here, right? Because it's look, no matter where you are on this hierarchy, you can always kind of improve. So here's a kind of illustrative passage of that. Which I think gives insight into what I think are the grounds of this kind of egalitarianism that I see in Conway. She says, for if a creature were entirely limited by its own individuality and totally constrained and confined within the very narrow boundaries of its own species, to the point that there was no mediator through which one creature could change into one another. So yeah, thinking about that hierarchy, a mediator, which allows you to kind of move up if you for some reason you happen to be a daisy, how do you move up to be a horse, to be a human? So if there was no mediator through which one creature could change into another, then no creature could attain further perfection and greater participation in divine goodness, nor could creatures act and react upon each other in different ways. This is my emphasis here. Obviously this is relevant, these issues about interaction, but I just want to focus on this part because I think what she's saying here is that if it were not possible for every creature to develop in this way, then you would be impugning God's goodness, right? Because God as the highest good he's the ground of goodness. He can't be an inefficacious cause. He has to be contributing this goodness, and he can only do that with creatures that are able to work together with him and then progress in turn. So to set limits on the ability of creatures to progress and get better is in a way to set limits on divine goodness, which is a no-no, right? Because God is infinitely good. Perfectly so. So I think this is the kind of metaphysical picture as I see it that's grounding the equality. Is it's a kind of for Conway, I think it's a consequence of divine goodness, that there is this kind of equality in all created beings. Oh, I should say creatures is her term for created beings. I don't think I said that yet. It's an interesting term. Some people might think like Frankenstein. No, it's just like anything that's created gets called a creature. Okay, so that's how I see the grounds of moral equality in Conway. But now, although it's radically, I think it's like a radical egalitarianism, like even a rock can make it. That's pretty intense, right? But it's still hierarchical. So there's still this sense, I think, of that, human beings qua species are just better than horses. And being an animal is better than being a plant. So there is still kind of hierarchy embedded even within this system of radical equality. Maybe it's like equality of opportunity, to progress. But further, there is a kind of fundamental gendered hierarchy, which is kind of interesting in Conway, and it's been remarked upon. So I want to take a look at this. So remember, I said that in Conway's system for the created world, everything has aspects of spirit and body. So the body and spirit are like components of her fundamental metaphysics of the nature of reality. So this is an interesting passage then to read in light of that. She says, now let us consider briefly how creatures are composed and how the parts of this composition can change into one another because they originally had one and the same essence and being. In every visible creature, there is body and spirit, or a more active and a more passive principle, which are appropriately called male and female because they're analogous to husband and wife. And in the last talk, we saw even more passages with the continuation of this, where she's talking about the passivity of the female, the female body. And so this is kind of interesting that while having a kind of radically egalitarian picture on the one hand, she's also kind of inscribing in the fundamental level of her metaphysics this kind of very kind of stereotypical idea of femininity being passive, though it kind of looks like if it's a matter of body and spirit, it looks like everybody has those aspects as well, which makes the whole system a lot more complicated when she talks about female creatures. But I think it's important to note that she can be an egalitarian, but also have certain kind of hierarchies that are still reinscribed into her metaphysics. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Huayang.
Yeah. So when Hope talked about her ideas based on Conway, she really inspired me to think about Yunjidang, who is the Korean woman Confucian philosopher in 18th century, and probably she was. We can say she was the first woman Confucian philosopher across East Asian countries. So especially one passage from Im's writings, I think, could be used to have, as a starting point for a conversation between Conway and Im. So let me introduce with her writings. Though I am a woman, still the nature I originally received contains no distinction between male and female. Though I have not been able to learn what Anyan learned, Anyan is the best disciple of Confucius. So what Anyan learned, I honestly share his commitment to become a sage. And so I have made a summary of what I have observed and written it down here to collect my thoughts. So first of all, I want to also just highlight that she was also very impressive as a person, probably the first woman Confucian philosopher who decided to leave her own writings behind. Her predecessors, was told it's not woman writing, and then writing is not woman's work to do. So many of them decided to burn. So we have really little. But she made the decision, I will leave. But for today's purpose, I think the two things are very more important. So I have actually underlined for your attention those are my emphasis. So she's talked about the nature she originally received, which contains no distinction. And also she makes a connection to her commitment to to become a sage, sharing the commitment to become a sage. So focusing on these two aspects, I will talk more. Next slide, please. Yunjidang's exposition poses the problem of how to relate Neo-Confucian ideas about a pure and perfect original nature with a description of what is like to be a human being pursuing the kinds of quotidian lives that most find appealing. She crafts her explanation focusing on Anyan's unwavering commitment to learn and practice the way in an ongoing effort to purge himself of self-centered desires and return to his original nature, which is humanness, the Confucian cardinal virtue. Next slide, please. Im connects the interpretation of this line with Anya's well-known love of learning, a theme that was philosophically and personally salient and poignant for her. Im begins by noting that while Anyan was fortunate in having been born with a particularly refined and balanced physical nature, he manifested remarkable perseverance and persistence in his quest for moral self-improvement. Next slide, please. So here I want to share some basic Neo-Confucian metaphysical claim that is based on. Very roughly, I can say it is Neo-Confucian metaphysics that pattern principle is one, but its manifestations are many. So it's the pattern principle, it's like there is only one sun or moon, but you can see many manifestations of these suns or moon on the earth, like in the pond or in a lake, things like that. And each and everything in the universe shares the same original nature or pattern principle. Our physical bodies separate us into distinct individuals. So this one we could call like a key material. So the Neo-Confucian metaphysics has the pattern principle and the key material. Okay, next slide, please. So Im's idea on the moral equality, I think we can say, so male and female share one pattern principle, but they are separate by the key material. Hidden but clear gender differences in the realm of rituals, partially drawn from Neo-Confucian cosmology, like yin-yang and heaven and earth, which restricted women from the pursuit of sagely learning. I'll present a little bit more about this. So Yunjidang, by appealing to Anyan's love of learning and his perseverance and persistence in his quest for moral self-improvement in relation to the highest virtue of Confucianism, humanness, I think probably nullifies or neutralizes the gender disparity posed onto herself. Next slide, please. So here, in the writing we have seen, Anyan serves as an effective and poignant reminder that we all share the same pure nature and are capable of achieving moral perfection. Im appeals to Neo-Confucian metaphysical claim for moral equality. So I think the Im's line of arguments penetrates through the differentiating physical realm governed by given material toward a higher metaphysical unity and oneness with the power of commitment, and effort that never ends throughout one's life. Now, back to Hope.
Okay. So now, again, this is in progress and we're working through our ideas. So we like, any feedback or help is greatly appreciated. But now we ask the question, how might these thinkers have learned from or inspired one another, if they had engaged with each other's kind of metaphysics? And they're both giving a kind of metaphysical, account of the grounds of moral equality, which maybe you don't think you should do that. Maybe it's just you think it's basic. So this is definitely a move that they're making here, which is interesting. And interestingly, both thinkers accept that we have a kind of single essence. So there's this kind of shared commitment to this, kind of goodness and this shared essence. And my suggestion is that Conway may have reconsidered her gendered hierarchy that she inscribes into the kind of the spirit body distinction. If she had maybe had a conversation like this, because it's interesting how, in the passage that I showed you, where she introduces this idea of the female is passive and the male is active, the line before it, she's just emphasizing the unity of our essences, and how we're all the same. And then in the next line, this comes back. And so, yeah, my thought is maybe she might have reconsidered whether that is necessary as a fundamental feature of metaphysics, rather than perhaps another feature of reality, which I think we'll pass it over now back to Hua Young, just to kind of build up to what the point might be here.
Yeah, can we go back to the previous slide, please?
Yes.
Yeah, so when Hope came with this slide, then these points, especially the last two things. So yes, both thinkers accept that we have a single essence. And also she mentioned about Conway that about the gender hierarchy. So I was more, Hope inspired me, and I started to think, I'm still percolating my ideas. Then I came up with some ideas at this moment. Now, next slide, please. So I think I should, there is a kind of hidden things that for today's, I could not show, I could not go deeper, but there is something Yunjidang was based on that I think I need to elaborate a little bit more about New Confucian, the metaphysics, and how it's connected. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry.
So here I briefly wanted to show that the left side is the one Chinese New Confucian scholar, Zhidong's diagram of the supreme ultimate. So here you can see from the top, the Taiji. It's a kind of, roughly speaking, it shows the unity, the oneness of all. Then the second line, you can see that it's divided in the key material world realm, that yin and yang and activity and tranquility, you can see that the development. And then the second line from the bottom, you can see now the woman, male and female, appears. So there is one idea about how New Confucian metaphysics and ontology is connected, and also into the realm of human life. And on the right side, this is a New Confucian curriculum for sagely learning, as developed by another Korean New Confucian scholar, Twege. And when we look at his 10 diagrams on sagely learning, I'm sorry, it's typed sagely learning. The diagrams from 1 to 5, you can see it's number 1 is the left one, the supreme, the ultimate. Then it develops into learning. So you can see the connection that Confucian metaphysics is connected to the learning, and here the elementary learning and great learning. And these are So you can see the connections that in Neo-Confucian worldview, metaphysics, and self-cultivation. And often this self-cultivation is closely connected to ritual practices. Here, when I say ritual, it's very roughly speaking, it's a kind of everyday practices, everyday activities. So it includes from the greetings every day, sweeping your house, and also it includes the government, the governing, the politics. So it's a very broad term, but in general, it's about how you do it, actually implement it in everyday life. So the last slide, please. Next one. Yeah. So now you have seen the build up. I have built up these two metaphysics, and then now this is from. You don't have to see everything, but I just wanted to show that the one diagram was about the great learning. So on top, you can see the trajectory of the way for great learning, which begins from self-cultivation, regulation of family, governing the state, and making the world tranquil and happy. Then that leads us towards sagehood. But actually, all these have matching practices in the ritual realms. And if you look at more closely that Jussi's orthodox, Confucian metaphysics, that women are kind of confined in their one part. So I think what Yunjidang does, by directly appealing to she shares the commitment for the love of learning, she's just directed, talking about it, she's kind of nullifies all these detailed ritual relevant practices. So I'm still, this is my idea until now. Probably in the future, I can bring in more detailed how in relation to Yunjidang's Neo-Confucian ideas more deeply. But for today, I think that's what I have. Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so I think on this slide, we'll both make comments, or if you feel, I'll say something, and if you feel satisfied, then it's okay. But if you want to say something else. So I mean, the kind of thing that I'm starting to hone in towards, and again, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this, is that she seems like she's accepting a kind of gender inequality, Conway is, in her fundamental metaphysics, at least insofar as we take her remarks about body and spirit seriously, and it seems to me, and then I'll just say what I understood from Hua Young in our conversation, is that Im is really rejecting gender inequality as a kind of aspect of the fundamental metaphysics. She's really just focused on this idea that, yes, everyone is one in nature and there's no difference in our ability to be a sage. Definitely not a difference based on any gender categories that could stop. It's about loving learning, and it's about the persistence and the perseverance, to pursue. And she has that as well and recognizes that. But she also sees that gender inequality is a part of reality, just as a part of these kind of ritualized forms of practices, which she recognizes she's prohibited from as a matter of social and political fact, not because she's incapable of expressing those practices in the way that puts her closer to humaneness, I guess is the concept. But yeah, so go ahead. I don't know if you want to
I just wanted to add that in the writing I cited today, that Yunjidang didn't mention much about the reality part, but it was definitely part of her life, because she still lived a traditional woman's life. So nobody actually knew, not nobody, sorry, but she had a great mentor and teacher, who was her second brother, Im Sung-ju, and who really was a renowned neo-Confucian philosopher at the time. And then they were really like friends and colleagues they've been exchanging. But except this, very few people that her family-in-laws she lived together didn't know until very late she was studying and writing. So she was doing these activities behind the closed door. So I think that fact says, tells us that she was experiencing and she recognized the gender inequality in a sense. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much. We really appreciated the opportunity to share our work in progress with you. So